And tributes are being paid to Emmerdale actor Steve Halliwell, who's died aged 77.
Just knowing her means you were born lucky. I'm the richest man alive because I've got everything I could ever need, and it's right.
Because he was such a gentle, humble, non-egotistical, grounded human, and I think we have a lot to thank Steve for here, and we miss him dearly, but I think this is a really fitting tribute.
This is the story of Steve Halliwell, the man who played Zak Dingle for 29 years, who revealed before his death that most of the struggles his character faced weren't acting at all. They were his own life playing out on screen. The homeless storylines, the battles with drinking, the run-ins with the law, he'd lived them all. And that departure back in 2003 that he claimed was for quality family time turned out to be a lie because he was actually checking into rehab. So, who was Steve Halliwell?
That I'm remembered for that, that I'll be remembered for a character that was well loved.
Steve Halliwell passed away in December 23 at 77. But before he went, he made sure people knew the truth about the character that made him a household name, and what he told them was remarkable. Zak Dingle wasn't just a role. The character was practically his autobiography. Zak Dingle was never meant to stick around. And when Steve Halliwell walked through the doors of Emmerdale in '94, his contract covered precisely 2 episodes with one simple job: have a bare-knuckle fight with an established character called Ned Glover, lose the fight, and clear off. His very first scene broadcast on the 20th of October '94 showed exactly that, with Zak scrapping against Ned before the pair of them went tumbling down an embankment straight into a stream. Job done, thanks very much, see you later. Except they kept bringing him back.
Not going to be around forever. And I'd say that I needed you to step up to be head of this family.
Years later on Good Morning Britain, Halliwell explained how baffled he was by the whole thing. The original contract was to have a fight with an existing character and lose the fight, acting as a foil for that character, but he must have done something right because they kept bringing him back, and to be honest, he never knew how it happened. Something about this scruffy bloke in a flat cap resonated though, and producer Mervyn Watson had introduced the Dingles to inject some humor into the show after the dark drama of the '93 plane crash. What began as nothing more than a spot of bother over a couple of episodes transformed into British soap's most enduring family, and by the time Steve filmed his last scenes in '23, he'd appeared in over 2,400 episodes, making him Emmerdale's second longest-serving cast member.
Aren't it good, yeah? You ever thought of entertaining people for a living? Yeah, you don't.
Not bad for a 2-episode stint that should have ended with a tumble into a stream. In 2014, Steve Halliwell sat down with the Daily Mirror and made a confession that explained everything about why Zak Dingle felt so bloody real. He wasn't acting, he was remembering. His words to them were direct and startling. He was born to play Zak Dingle because the cap really does fit, and most of the storylines he'd acted out, he'd actually lived in real life. Being broke, getting evicted, trouble with the law, then there was depression, drinking, and having to fight your way out of situations. He'd lived all those things and more, and he couldn't blame anyone else because he'd pressed the self-destruct button himself. Every struggle, every hardship, every moment where Zak hit rock bottom, Steve had been there himself, long before the cameras started rolling.
I don't know for sure, but I think I might have to ask you a favour. Sorry.
Born Stephen Harold Halliwell on the 19th of March, '46, in Bury, Lancashire, his path to television stardom was about as far from glamorous as you could get. With his father Fred working at the transparent paper mill and young Steve following him through the same factory gates at 15. The work was pretty grim by his own account, and after that he tried his hand at an engineering apprenticeship, but his heart wasn't in it because he was doing what was expected of him, getting a trade, but he was no good at it. At 18, inspired by Jack Kerouac's On the Road, he packed a bag and headed for London, expecting romance and adventure. But what he got was rather different. The romance he'd imagined never materialized, and instead he ended up getting locked up because in those days it was considered against the law to sleep rough, which meant he was charged with wandering abroad under the Vagrancy Act. 2 weeks in Ashford Prison on remand followed that charge, and later, after getting mixed up with a gang who broke into an off-license, he served 3 months in a detention center. This wasn't method acting preparation or research for a future role. This was a young man trying to survive and making some poor choices along the way. Those experiences never left him, which meant that years later, when Emmerdale scripts arrived, showing Zak struggling with poverty, dealing with the law, or fighting his demons, Steve didn't need to research the emotions, because he just had to remember. For years, there was a carefully maintained fiction about Steve Halliwell's departure from Emmerdale in 2003, with the official line being simple and wholesome. He wanted to spend quality time with his family and friends. Nothing dramatic, nothing sinister, just a bloke taking a break from work.
We're not talking about childish pranks here. This is deadly serious. Now, what do you know?
His statement at the time made it clear he had no axe to grind. And it wasn't about salary or storylines, saying he loved Zak and he loved Emmerdale. But he'd asked for a spell out to spend some quality time with his family and friends. That wasn't the truth, though, not even close. The reality was that Steve Halliwell had checked himself into an alcohol rehabilitation center, and he later described himself as a functioning alcoholic, one of those people who could turn up to work, deliver their lines, live their life, but was far too reliant on drink and knew it needed sorting. Returning to the show on the 16th of October 2003 was one thing, but the honesty about what had really happened came years afterward. Speaking the truth about addiction takes courage, especially when you're on a popular television program watched by millions. But Steve eventually told the truth, and in doing so, he gave others permission to talk about their own battles. The drink wasn't his only demon either, and he spoke openly about depression, wondering at times whether he might have bipolar disorder, though he never received that diagnosis. These weren't abstract concepts to him. They were daily realities he'd learned to manage. Emmerdale handed Steve one of the most challenging storylines of his career in 2012, when after Zak attacked his son Kane in a fit of rage, temporarily paralyzing the lad, the character suffered a complete mental breakdown, with panic attacks, hospitalization, the works. For Steve, this wasn't just another script, because it was personal. His own mental health problems gave him an opportunity to depict that struggle, and he threw everything into the performance, with every panic attack, every moment of confusion and fear, every scene where Zak couldn't understand what was happening to him, drawing from Steve's own experiences with depression. The result was television that felt uncomfortably real, because in many ways it was. The portrayal didn't go unnoticed, and Emmerdale won the 2012 Mind Media Award in the soap category, an accolade given to programs that accurately and sensitively portray mental health issues. Stephen Fry himself presented Steve with the prize, which he recalled with obvious pride. Fry handed over the prize and said they'd done a good job at depicting mental health issues, and Steve was proud of that moment. Winning acting awards for technical skill is one thing, but being recognized for helping people understand what it's like to live with mental illness is quite another, and that award, more than any soap award or nomination, seemed to mean the world to him. By 2018, Steve Halliwell was 72 and had been playing Zak Dingle for nearly a quarter of a century, and that's when his body sent him a rather urgent message: slow down. Life-saving heart surgery and a pacemaker fitting in September of that year took him off-screen for 5 months, with genuine concerns about whether he'd return at all. But in January 2019, Steve gave an interview to The Sun that showed his characteristic dry humor was intact, saying he was back at work in a few weeks and feeling fitter than ever after having the pacemaker fitted in September, which had done him the world of good and made him feel fantastic. Emmerdale had been brilliant throughout and really looked after him, and he had to spend some time in hospital where it was really funny to see the entire Dingle clan around his bed. Imagine lying in a hospital bed wired up to monitors with your visitors being not just your family, but also the actors who play your on-screen family. The Dingles visiting the Dingle patriarch, with life imitating art, imitating life. Returning to filming on the 13th of May 2019 came just in time for one of the most emotional storylines the show had done in years. Zak and Lisa Dingle's second wedding on the 23rd of May was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure, and it was also Lisa's death scene, actress Jane Cox's exit after more than 2 decades on the show. That wedding, with Zak marrying the love of his life for a second time only to lose her, marked a turning point. And after that, Steve's appearances became increasingly sporadic. The show explained Zak's absences with references to helping granddaughter Debbie in Scotland or dealing with health issues, and the scripts were mirroring reality because Steve's health was declining, and everyone knew it. The 27th of June 23 saw Steve Halliwell's last appearance on Emmerdale, and it was a small scene, almost throwaway, but looking back, it feels impossibly poignant. Zak turned up on a mobility scooter that his family had decorated for him, and when Dan Spencer compared him to Evel Knievel, the old daredevil, Zak delivered what would be his final line. He'd give the Ring of Fire a miss for today. Classic Zak, really, self-deprecating, warm, funny, but there was something else in that episode, a moment that hinted at what was coming. Kane found his dad on the floor, unable to get up, and of all the Dingles, only Kane knew how poorly Zak really was, which meant Steve was letting the audience in on a secret. This was the beginning of the end. 6 months later, on Friday the 15th of December 23, Steve Halliwell died at St. James's Hospital in Leeds at 77 years old, having also received care at Wheatfield Hospice, which tells you everything you need to know about his final days, because hospice care isn't about curing, it's about comfort, dignity, and peace. His family never disclosed the specific cause of death because they didn't need to, and a period of ill health was enough. What mattered was what they said next. He went to sleep peacefully with his loved ones around him, making them laugh to the end. The most amazing father and grandfather you could ever wish for, with family being everything to him, and he didn't want sadness, just a celebration of a life well lived. Making them laugh to the end. That's Zak Dingle through and through. When the news broke, the tributes came flooding in, but they weren't the usual polite statements actors issue when a colleague dies. These were raw, heartfelt, and revealed something beautiful about the man behind the flat cap. James Hooton, who played Steve's on-screen son Sam Dingle since '95, wrote that Steve Halliwell was the first person he met when he walked through the door into the Emmerdale studios and they remained friends until the end, calling him a truly loved character and a strong, proud man. Danny Miller, who played Aaron Dingle, shared how from day one, Steve took him under his wing and helped guide him on and off set, and he never failed to effortlessly make everyone corpse with a simple look or grunt or earning him the title of King of the Double Takes and King of the Dingles. That detail about making people corpse, actors' slang for making someone laugh during a take and ruining the scene, shows Steve was clearly a nightmare to work with if you were trying to keep a straight face. Lisa Riley, who played Mandy Dingle, called him a legend in my eyes and noted he was still laughing right up to the end. But perhaps the most telling tribute came from Jeff Hordley, who played Kane Dingle. Hordley pointed out that everyone at the company had a lot to thank Steve for because he was such a gentle, humble, non-egotistical, grounded human. And that kind of behavior helps to permeate that culture throughout the cast. The patriarch of television's most famous working-class family was gentle, humble, and non-egotistical in real life. No diva behavior, no demanding special treatment, no letting fame go to his head. Just a bloke from Bury who never forgot where he came from or what he'd been through to get there. ITV's John Whiston, managing director of continuing drama, summed it up perfectly when he said that to millions of Emmerdale viewers, Steve was the brawny but crafty Dingle patriarch who led the clan with a strong fist and a warm heart. And to everyone who worked on Emmerdale, he was a much-loved friend and colleague, the undoubted father of the show, but also its fun, mischievous uncle. Zak Dingle remained alive in Emmerdale until the 15th of October 24, 10 months after Steve's death, because the show had to find the right way to say goodbye to a character who'd been part of the furniture for 30 years. The storyline had Zak out poaching that morning, telling Debbie it was the best morning ever, then falling asleep in his chair and not waking up. A proper Dingle exit, really, doing what he loved, going peacefully, no fuss. His funeral episode aired on the 17th of October 24, deliberately timed to coincide with the Dingles' 30th anniversary since the family had first appeared on the 20th of October 94, which meant the show was coming full circle. Producer Sophie Roper acknowledged how difficult it was, saying they were going to be marking Zak's passing, and it would be so very difficult for a lot of people who work on the show, and obviously for a lot of viewers who had grown to love Zak for many years, but it would be a hugely fitting tribute to such an iconic character. Jeff Naylor, who had directed Steve's very first episode in '94, returned to direct the funeral episodes, which meant the same director who'd filmed that bare-knuckle fight and tumble into the stream 3 decades earlier now filmed Zak's final journey. You couldn't write it better if you tried. Jeff Hordley recalled filming those episodes with a mix of sadness and warmth, saying that as much as it was poignant when the camera was rolling, off-camera, they were putting lots of Steve-isms in, making each other laugh and telling stories of Steve throughout the week. Even in death, Steve was making people laugh. Before we finish, there's one gloriously daft footnote to Steve Halliwell's career that deserves mentioning, and it involves the Woolpackers, a band formed in November '96 by Steve and fellow Emmerdale cast members named after the show's pub, the Woolpack. They released a single called Hillbilly Rock, Hillbilly Roll, and against all sensible predictions, it reached number 5 in the UK singles chart, which meant Steve Halliwell, the former homeless teenager who'd done time in detention centers, had a top 10 hit, and the Dingles had conquered the music charts. The whole thing was ridiculous and wonderful in a way that could only happen in the 90s, and it shows that Steve never took himself too seriously because he'd lived through genuine hardship and trauma, but never lost his ability to embrace life's absurdities with good humor. Steve published his autobiography in 2014, aptly titled, "If the Cap Fits, My Rocky Road to Emmerdale." And according to one story, a fan once approached him in a cafe and mentioned they were reading his book, to which Steve smiled and replied that he didn't bother reading it because he lived it instead. That quote tells you everything about Steve Halliwell. He didn't romanticize his past or pretend it was research for a role. He lived it, survived it, and eventually channeled it into a character that became one of British television's most beloved figures. The truth he revealed before his death, that Zak Dingle wasn't acting, but autobiography, actually makes his performance more remarkable because you have to think about what he did, taking his lowest moments, his darkest struggles, his biggest regrets, and transforming them into something that brought comfort and entertainment to millions of people for nearly 30 years takes something special. The homelessness, the time in prison, the depression, the alcoholism, all the things he could have hidden or been ashamed of, he wore openly, not for attention or sympathy, but because he understood something about how authenticity connects with people. Viewers didn't love Zak Dingle because he was perfect. They loved him because he was flawed, struggling, real. When Steve Halliwell lied in 2003 about his departure being for family time, it was the exception that proved the rule, because that was the only real deception in a career otherwise marked by brutal honesty. And even that lie was eventually corrected. His reduced appearances from 19 onwards weren't surrounded by mystery or speculation because everyone knew his health was failing after the heart surgery, with no scandal to hide, no controversy to manage, just a 70-something man whose body was telling him it was time to rest. Steve Halliwell was never nominated for a BAFTA and never won a National Television Award, with his British Soap Awards nominations for Best Actor in 2002 and 2007 not resulting in wins, which means by the industry's usual measures, you might say he wasn't properly recognized. But he had something better than a shelf full of trophies because he had 30 years of steady work doing something he loved, co-stars who genuinely adored him, millions of viewers who invited him into their living rooms week after week, year after year, decade after decade. And he had that Mind Media Award presented by Stephen Fry for helping people understand mental illness. More than that, he proved something that Hollywood often forgets. Your past doesn't have to define you, but it can inform your present in powerful ways, and Steve Halliwell took the worst chapters of his life and turned them into art, taking pain and making it purposeful. When that 2-episode contract landed on his doorstep in '94, Steve Halliwell was 48 years old and had been homeless, imprisoned, and broke, having battled addiction and depression, which meant by most measures he was an unlikely candidate to become one of British television's most enduring characters. But producer Mervyn Watson saw something in that first fight scene. The other actors saw something when he walked onto set, and millions of viewers saw something when Zak Dingle first appeared on their screens, something authentic, something real, something worth keeping around. Steve Halliwell once said he pressed the self-destruct button on his early life, but he also found a way to rebuild, and the cap didn't just fit, it was made for him. Wearing it for 29 years showed us that redemption isn't a destination you reach, but a choice you make every day to be honest about your struggles while working to overcome them. That's the truth Zak Dingle revealed. That's the truth Steve Halliwell lived. And that's why when the news of his death was announced, the tributes didn't just mourn an actor, they celebrated a man who'd lived authentically, loved deeply, and made people laugh right up to the end. He didn't want sadness, his family said, just a celebration of a life well lived. Fair enough, Steve. Fair enough.